Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best top laners for patch 6.22. So first up is going to be Nasus. So right now, there are two different kinda styles of Nasus that are going around in the top lane. The first one is the normal just Q stack Nasus. You just try to farm up your Q and become a monster once it does get to the mid to late game. And there's also another style to where you play him more early game focused, and you just try to pressure a lot in the early game by building a ZZ Rot portal first and by maxing your E. By doing this, it just creates a lot of pressure in the top lane. You're going to be able to constantly shove the wave in with your E, and if you are going up against a melee top lane champion, it's going to be very easy for you to just poke them down with your E and continuously keep pushing them into your tower. Now, if you do go for this second build of like the ZZ Rot and the E max, then you are going to create a lot of pressure in the top lane, and the enemy jungler is going to have to come top a lot of the time if he wants to stop you from like taking multiple towers, because with the ZZ Rot, and once you do have your Trinity Force finish, then you're going to be able to split push really well. And if you are in a melee matchup, it's going to be very easy for you to outduel the enemy top laner. So all in all, I'd say that if you are wanting to play Nasus more like early game focused, then I would go for the Emax and then the ZZ Rot. But if you want to play him for more of the mid to late game, then I would just go for the normal Q stack. It just does depend on how you want to play him. He is also a lot stronger now though, because his ultimate did get buffed a few patches ago. He now gets a lot of armor and magic resist when he does use his ultimate, so he's just even more hard to kill now. Now, as for when you should not pick Nasus, if you are going for the standard Q stack Nasus, then I would try to avoid ranged matchups. It's going to be very hard for you to farm your Q consistently in the laning phase if you are going up against someone that's just going to constantly be harassing you. Also, don't pick him if your team is really lacking teamfight. Nasus isn't like the best teamfight champion. He doesn't have any strong engage or disengage in his kit, so if your team is lacking that, then I wouldn't pick him in that situation. And also, I would look to pick him if the enemy team is fairly lower ranged. If they are lower ranged champions, then that means they're going to have to get up close to deal their damage, and therefore your Wither is going to be a lot more effective. If the enemies do have to come into your Wither range to deal damage, then you're just going to do really well against them, especially if they're a champion like Yasuo or Riven. Once it does reach the mid to late game, it's going to be very hard for them to do a lot against a Nasus in a team fight. Next up is going to be Kayle. So Kayle right now is really strong in this meta in my opinion, because we are in a pretty heavy assassin meta right now, or for at least the first few weeks of this new patch. Assassins are going to be played a lot. The assassins did get their rework, so everybody's going to be playing them, and the best champion probably to counter assassins is Kayle due to her ultimate. You'll see in the background gameplay here, I was going up against a Rengar and a Zed, or the enemy team had a Rengar and a Zed, and once it reached like team fighting stage, they couldn't do anything against me, because whichever target that they wanted to go for, I would just put my ultimate on them, and then it just makes them pretty useless. The Zed on the enemy team ended up building Edge of Night, Maw, and Merc Treads, and I was still able to outduel him. I was still able to 1v1 him due to my ultimate. So if the enemy team does have like even just one assassin, then I would definitely recommend playing Kayle in the top lane. She's got a great laning phase as well for top lane. She really doesn't have any hard matchups. The only matchup that I can think of that she does really bad in is Pantheon. Pantheon can do really well against Kayle because his passive does a really good job at countering her. Whenever Kayle tries to auto attack, if Pantheon does have his passive up, or if Pantheon does try to engage, then Kayle is going to lose out on a lot of damage, and Pantheon is going to outtrade you a lot of the time. Once it does reach mid to late game though, she's one of the best mid to late game champions. As long as you can just farm up in the laning phase, get to like your 3 items, then you're going to be very successful on Kayle, and you're going to deal a ton of damage. And she's also fairly easy to play as well. She's a point and click champion, or she's basically a right click champion for a lot of her damage. So as long as you can kite decently with Kayle and you can just use your ultimate on the correct target in a team fight, then you are going to do well with her. Now when and when should you not pick Kayle? Pick her if the enemy team does have an assassin for sure. Don't pick her if you are lacking engage, because Kayle really isn't the best engaged top lane champion. And also try to avoid Pantheon and Jace. Those are really the only two matchups that I've found to struggle with while playing as Kayle. She probably does have a few other matchups that she isn't that great in, but if she is in a melee matchup, or even if she is in another ranged matchup, she can farm really easily in the laning phase, scale up, and become a late game monster. Next up is going to be Sion. So right now, Sion's synergy with the new mastery, Courage of the Colossus, I think it's called, he's just really strong right now. The fact that he's got his W shield on top of the mastery shield that he's going to be getting just makes him super hard to kill, like in the laning phase, and especially once it does reach a mid to late game team fight. Once you do have your HP stacked as Sion, and once you like farm minions, I'm pretty sure like the more minions you get, the stronger your shield is going to be. So the shield from your W is going to be super strong mid to late game, and then also once you do have your tank stats, your shield from the Courage of the Colossus is also going to be extremely strong. So he's just going to be so hard to kill in team fights, as long as he can get like his Q stun off, or he can hit his ultimate, because the mastery does only proc on hard CC, so you can't just like use your E in a team fight and proc the shield. He does do good damage for a tank as well. His Q just does so much if you do end up maxing it out, so you can definitely have a very good laning phase as Sion. I find that a lot of people are just surprised at like how much damage Sion can do while building full tank, so that is another really good pro to this champion. He's got really good engage and crowd control too. He's probably one of the best engaged top lane champions just because his ultimate covers such a long range, so if he does see the enemy AD carry or mid laner caught out of position, then even if he is like a pretty good distance away, he can close that gap with his ultimate, get to them, and allow his team to catch up with the amount of crowd control he does have. Now he's also one of the best roaming top laners at level 6, so whenever you are playing Sion, once you do hit 6, if you know that you can't really have much kill pressure in the laning phase, then look to shove out the wave and look to either roam mid or bot with your ultimate, because if you do get a good ultimate off like down bot lane and you get a double kill, then you can snowball the game really hard. Now as for when and when you should not pick Sion, try to avoid Darius and Trundle. The reason for Trundle is because Sion is going to pretty much build full tank, and once it does reach the mid to late game, Trundle is going to be able to steal your stats and make you really squishy, and the Trundle is going to be extremely tanky, so try to avoid that matchup if you can. Now as for Darius does rely on a lot of his damage coming from like his auto attacks. He wants to get his passive stacking, and it's really easy for him to do that against Sion, because Sion does have to be pretty up close to deal any of his damage. So if the Sion wants to deal damage, then it's not really going to end up too well for him, especially at level 6. The Darius is just going to auto attack you and then just get a true damage ultimate off. Pick him if you are lacking engage. He is one of the best engaged top laners in the game, and also if you're lacking a tank, then Sion is also a great choice. Next up on the list here is going to be Kenan. So I've had Kenan on my top 5 for at least the past few patches now, so I'm not going to go into too much detail as to why he's a strong pick, but basically he's one of the best teamfight top lane champions. If you can get ahead with Kenan in the early game, even if your team does feed a little bit, say your bot lane dies a few times in the laning phase, as long as you do get ahead and as long as you have your items, then you can still carry bad teams with this champion. One good flash proto belt ultimate in a team fight can just single-handedly win you that fight and just win you the game, so that's why he's a great top lane champion. He can also do well right now against like the assassins that are being played, because he is going to build his Zonias, and he also does do great against those low mobility AD carries like Jinx, like Misfortune, and like Jhin. So when should you not pick Kenan? I would look to pick him if the enemy team does have a fairly low mobility team comp. The reason for it is because it's going to be very easy for you to lock them down with your ultimate in a team fight if they don't have a dash or a gap closer or a blink to get out of your ultimate. Don't pick him if they do have a lot of disengage, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to find that engage in a team fight and get onto the back line if, for example, you get knocked out by a Janna ultimate, or if you get Sejuani Sejuani ulted, then it's going to be hard for you to be successful in those matchups. Now, I would try to avoid it Jace, Aurelia, and Jarvan. Those are 3 champions that can do pretty well in the laning phase against Kenan because they can rush a Maw and you're not really going to be able to snowball off of them or deal a lot of damage to them. He can still go even in those matchups and he can still do well, but if you're looking to snowball in the laning phase, then I wouldn't pick him against those champions. I would definitely look to pick him though if the enemy team does have a Gnar, a Jax, or a Darius, because in those matchups he can kite those champions really well. He can poke them down, and then once they do get to around like half HP or a little bit below that, he can just look to go for an all-in and just kill them at level 6. And to round out this top 5 is going to be Jace. So Jace right now is probably one of the best hard carry top laners that you can play. He's a really good lane bully top lane champion. He really doesn't have any matchups that hard counter him, so it just means he's going to be able to farm up really easily in the laning phase. In a lot of matchups, he does have kill pressure, so he can look to go for that first blood or he can look to go for that kill in the laning phase. And if you do get ahead with Jace, if you do get first blood, or if you do like end up getting a kill in lane, it's going to be very hard for the enemy team to shut you down. I've seen so many Jaces just end up like 1v2ing in the laning phase. They get ahead, like they get first blood, the enemy jungler tries to gank him and he just ends up getting a double kill. So he's just such a hard champion to shut down and a really hard champion to deal with. He's also one of the best tower pushing champions in the game because of his W, and because the first blood tower now gives 650 gold, it makes him a super strong pick for the top lane. If he ends up pushing out the enemy top lane champion, then he's going to get a lot of damage on that tower, and if he can just constantly keep chunking away at that tower, then he is going to eventually get that first blood tower gold. He's great at sieging down towers as well if he does get ahead, so if you do end up getting a few kills as Jace, then look to just group with your team, look to take mid tower, look to even go bot lane and try to take bot tower if your bot lane is struggling, because your poke damage against like an enemy squishy champion, your QE combo is probably going to do around half their HP, so it's going to be very hard for the enemy team to deal with you if you do get ahead. Now, as for when you should not pick Jace, you can pretty much pick him into anything and you can at least go even in the laning phase. The only champions that I would really try to avoid are Braum and Yasuo. Malphite can also do pretty well against Jace if the game does go like to the mid to late game and Malphite can just stack that armor, but I would definitely recommend just not picking him against Braum, because with Braum's shield, I'm pretty sure it's up every time that Jace's QE combo is up. So if you are trying to siege down towers with Jace, then Braum can do a really good job at countering your poke damage. And lastly, to round out the video, the honorable mentions are going to be Nautilus, Aurelia, Riven, Poppy, Malphite, Wukong, and Maokai. So I want to talk about Nautilus, Poppy, Malphite, and Maokai here. So all 4 of those champions are really good Courage of the Colossus users, and because that mastery is pretty strong right now, I feel like those tankier top laners are pretty good this patch. I would definitely say that Nautilus is the best out of those 4. The reason for it is because he's very similar to Sion in the sense that he does have his W, which is going to give him a massive shield, and he's also got the mastery, which is going to give him a really big shield as well. So he's just going to be super tanky in a mid to late game team fight and very hard to deal with. Now, Poppy, Malphite, and Maokai are all pretty good with the new mastery as well, because they all can proc it very easily, like in a team fight. All that Maokai has to do is use his W, Malphite just has to hit an ultimate, and then Poppy either has to use her E into a wall, or she needs to use her ultimate to knock someone up. So if you are looking to try like a tankier top lane champion this patch, I would definitely recommend it, and I would try any of those that I just recommended. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you guys have not already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.